In part 3 of module 1, unit 5, we're going to be doing pretty much exactly the same thing as we did in part 2. We're going to be going through all of the same sort of stuff, but instead of fat loss, we're looking at it from the perspective of muscle gain now. So cracking on, because again, got a lot to get through and I'm fully aware you've sat through quite a while of me by now. You're probably a little sick of me. So we're going to start with this table. Again, we're looking at the right-hand column. We're looking at the things that we want for muscle gain. The first one is not an essential for muscle gain, but it's arguably the most reliable way of us gaining muscle, and that is a calorie surplus. And now I say it's not necessarily essential for muscle gain. You know, the mechanisms behind muscle growth are independent of a calorie surplus themselves. However, in terms of what the evidence says, a calorie surplus is absolutely the most reliable way of us gaining net muscle tissue. We need to fuel that growth to some extent. Looking at that, we also need to consider satiety on a day-to-day basis as well. If we're looking at a calorie surplus, we're essentially looking at overfeeding and very deliberate overfeeding as well. We need to ensure that our clients are able to eat enough food to be in that calorie surplus. We then need to look at muscle protein synthesis and the stimulation of that. That's one of our concerns on a day-to-day basis as well. On a more practical level, we need to also potentially consider gastrointestinal discomfort while training. If we're looking to gain net amounts of muscle, then not only are we in a calorie surplus and probably eating a little more food than we're potentially used to, but we're also probably, hopefully, going to be training relatively hard with the aim of stimulating the growth of that muscle tissue. Eric Helms put it really, really well when he said that training is the main stimulus for muscle growth. Nutrition is permissive. So we need to be looking at all of the stuff we're going to be going through in this video from that perspective. You can't force muscle growth purely by feeding someone. You do need to be training relatively hard. We're going to cover all the training stuff in later units and later modules as well. So we need to look at all of this information I'm giving you in this part as nutrition is permissive to muscle growth. Enjoyment and convenience, again, as with fat loss, are really important factors because, again, these are the day-to-day behaviors that somebody is going through in order to make a lifestyle change and to make a change to themselves. They need to ultimately enjoy what they're doing, and it needs to be convenient for them to do so in order for them to adhere to it and for them to sustain the process. Over the course of a week, we're looking at, again, that continued weight gain and that continued calorie surplus, and adherence, again, is going to be paramount to that. And then over the longer term, over months and years, we're going to be looking at, again, continued weight gain for that continued muscle growth and adherence. As with all of the information I've given you, adherence is arguably the #1 priority. In terms of things that we can change or adjust to fit these things on a daily basis, again, it's very, very similar to fat loss. We've got calorie, macro intake, food variety, and meal frequency. Again, the weekly and on the monthly bases are very similar to fat loss. We've got linearity of calorie intake again, and then adjusting calorie intake over the longer term as well. We've not got diet breaks in here. There are potentially some similar strategies that you can look at with muscle gain in terms of things like mini cuts. We're not going to go into those in a great level of detail here. If you do have any questions about that sort of approach, then feel free to ask them in either the community tab or in the Facebook group. But we're not going to be covering them here in huge detail because it's a very limited application, the mini cut. So in terms of bodybuilding, nutritional periodization, which is kind of what that falls under, Eric is going to cover a lot more of that in module 2.